director of the March on Washington, the man who organized this whole thing, Mr. Bayard Rustin.
Ladies and gentlemen, the first demand is that we have effective civil rights legislation, no compromise, no filibuster, and that it includes public accommodations, decent housing, integrated education, FEPC, and the right to vote. What do you say?
That was the architect of the March on Washington, civil rights activist Bayard Rustin. One of the greatest organizers in American history, Rustin was the main planner for that famed 1963 march. Yet, as an openly gay man in the 1960s, he stayed behind the scenes and largely out of the spotlight. Now his story is being told in the upcoming biopic Rustin, the first feature film from Higher Ground Productions. That, of course, is Barack and Michelle Obama's production company. And let's take a look at the film's trailer, which was just released this morning.
This new generation is restless and angry.
The pacifist is opposed to using violence, but must be prepared to receive it.
You're irrelevant.
It's Friday night. I've been called worse.
Your mere presence could derail the fight for racial justice in this country a good 10, 15 years.
On the day that I was born black, I was also born a homosexual.
Sometimes you gotta fight back to get
We're calling for a peaceful march on Washington.
We are committed to the cause of altering the trajectory of this country towards freedom. They either believe in freedom and justice for all, or they do not.
And joining us now is the film's director, George C. Wolfe. He has won a Directors Guild Award and 5 Tonys. George, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Glad to be here.
It is, of course, the anniversary today. We've spent a lot of time this morning talking about it. There are people who think of that day. They think of Martin Luther King Jr., of course. They think of Adam Clayton Powell Jr. They think of John Lewis. But tell us about Bayard Rustin and why you feel like this is the moment we should all get to know him, too.
Well, Bayard was, as you stated earlier, an astonishing organizer. It's remarkable to think that they planned initially for 100,000 people to show up, and they had 8 weeks to do it. And instead, 250,000 people showed up. And there was everything there from phones there, so the reporters could call in stories to water fountains and all these details that you don't think about. But it's one of the reasons why the march ran so smoothly. It's also one of the things interesting. Sound, he had this theory that sound was so important, and sound is how you turn a crowd into an audience. And so he required a very sophisticated sound system so that everybody was a part of the same moment. So just every single miraculous detail that you can think of, he covered and then some.
George, this is Al Sharpton. I have been blessed to have seen a screening of this film, and it is very well done. It's amazing. And
Thank you.
When I was 16 years old in 1991, I was able, 1971, I'm sorry. I started, I kind of was trying to rob 20 years, but I'm not going to do that. But in 1971, I started my own youth group. I had left the youth director of Operation Breadbasket New York chapter and formed National Youth Movement. And I went to see Bayard Rustin, who many of the older ministers were shunning, even at that late period in 71, wow, because of the homophobia and all. And I asked him, how do you organize? He started telling me about doing this. He put me in touch with labor. And I'm a 16-year-old kid. And when I left, I was saying, Mr. Rustin, thank you for your time. He says, young man, how are you going to start your own group with no money? And he gave me the first $500 check. He told Rochelle Horowitz, give the young man the check. Fast forward 3 years ago, I told this at an A. Philip Randolph Institute conference that Bayard Rustin founded the conference, named after A. Philip Randolph. And Rochelle Harwood stood up and said, he's telling the truth. I gave him the check.
Wow.
And she's also one of the features in your film.
Absolutely.
Talk about how Rochelle and Bayard worked with labor and really enacted a lot of the things that Dr. King and others in the civil rights movement leadership at that time that we remember today. They were like the ones that were the wheels that kept a coalition together of labor and civil rights and other groups.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's really interesting is that when certain civil rights organizations were a little bit cautious about joining in, they engaged labor. And so they were able to put into place all the dynamics that they wouldn't have otherwise. And they formed these incredibly intense coalitions. And Bayard did what he did primarily with a team of like Rochelle, a team of kids. They were in their late teens and early 20s, and they would work 12, 14 hours a day, solving all these problems, making connections. He formed a coalition with the Guardians, which was a black fraternal organization of police, and trained them individually in nonviolence. And those were the primary policing forces that were at play in Washington, D.C. So he engaged every single aspect. He convinced Mayor Wagner to alter the subway schedule so that therefore it was a rush hour schedule at 6 o'clock in the morning so that everybody could meet their various buses around the city. So he engaged labor, he engaged the city, he engaged the police, he engaged anybody who he possibly could just to pull off this phenomenal event. And there were all sorts of fears that violence and all sorts of things were going to happen that were going to be horrible, and nothing like that occurred because it was so smooth, so efficient, and so gloriously focused on the agenda, which is altering the direction that the country was going in terms of race.
George, just changing the subject just a little bit. I mean, obviously, I know the directors are not on strike. It's so great to have you here. It's so great to have some new content being released. How much has the strike in Hollywood affected your own role out of the film?
Well, it's interesting because I'm sitting here talking as opposed to some young, handsome, or beautiful actor instead of me. So it's had an impact in terms of that respect. But other than that, the film's all completely done. We released the trailers, so we're really excited about sharing it with the world, but more so sharing the story of this phenomenal American more than anything else. He changed, he altered this country in such a substantive way. And because of who he was, and because he was unapologetically who he was pushed more and more and more into the background. But finally, his story is being told and shared in a really expansive way. And I hope everybody will watch it and see how important it is to honor those who have come before.
Well, you are certainly a handsome enough face to promote it. We really appreciate you being here this morning. The new film, Rustin, will be in select theaters on November 3rd and on Netflix November 17th. Director George C. Wolfe, thank you again for being here. Congratulations on the film.